Why John McClane walked barefoot through glass. The image is burned into an entire generation of screen memory. Bare feet on carpet, broken glass under skin, a man in a sweat-stained undershirt hiding on the 30th floor of a building that was supposed to host a Christmas party. Millions have watched that scene on cable, on VHS, on TNT holiday marathons, on grainy syndicated broadcasts with the swearing dubbed over, but almost nobody watching at home ever knew the truth. That scene almost did not exist. The actor almost was not Bruce Willis, and the whole reason those shoes came off in the first place had nothing to do with action. Think back to how you first saw him, not the man, the image. A wisecracking cop with a smirk, a bloody undershirt, and the kind of tired eyes that told you he had already been through too much before the credits even started. That face became one of the most familiar action hero faces in American living rooms for the next 30 years. But in 1987, when the script for Die Hard was being shopped around Hollywood, that face was the last one anyone wanted. The role of John McClane was offered to a list of stars that reads like a wall of movie posters from the era. Arnold Schwarzenegger, Sylvester Stallone, Burt Reynolds, Richard Gere, Harrison Ford, Robert De Niro, Clint Eastwood. Accounts differ on the exact order and some names have been disputed over the years, but the pattern is consistent. Every established action star or leading man in town looked at the material and passed. Some thought the character was too ordinary, some were tied up in other projects, some simply did not see the appeal of a hero who bled, sweated, and complained the whole way through. Bruce Willis was not on anyone's short list. He was a television actor. He was the smirking romantic comedy half of Moonlighting, a show families watched on ABC in the mid-1980s, while wondering whether the two leads would ever stop bickering long enough to kiss. Willis was funny. He was charming. He was not, by any stretch of studio logic, an action hero. The networks even fought to keep him off the film, worried it would interfere with his television schedule. What finally freed him was a production pause on Moonlighting connected to his co-star's pregnancy. Suddenly, the sitcom-adjacent romantic lead was available. Fox paid him $5 million. For a TV actor with no theatrical action credits, that number was so controversial, it made the entertainment magazines and evening news segments of the day. Studio insiders whispered it was a mistake. The face we now consider iconic was originally a compromise nobody in the boardroom felt good about, and the studio's second problem was even stranger than the casting one. Because before Willis could ever be offered the role, the studio was legally required to hand it first to a 73-year-old crooner in a fedora. That is not a joke. It is one of the strangest true stories in the history of American action cinema, and most viewers who grew up watching Die Hard on television have never heard it. The film was based on a 1979 novel called Nothing Lasts Forever, written by Roderick Thorpe. That book was itself a sequel to an earlier novel called The Detective, and The Detective had been adapted into a 1968 film starring Frank Sinatra as a New York cop named Joe Leland. When Fox acquired the rights to the sequel novel, an old contract from that 1968 movie came with it. The studio was contractually obligated to offer the lead role to Sinatra first, so they did. They sent Sinatra the script. He was 73 years old. He politely declined, and with that one refusal, the character we now know as John McClane was released into the wild, eventually landing in the hands of a smirking TV actor from a network detective comedy. Without that clause, without that refusal, the barefoot cop we all remember never happens. The most rewatched Christmas movie in cable television history exists partly because of a paperwork detail from a Sinatra picture 2 decades earlier. But even after they had their actor, the script still had a bigger problem. The hero had no real reason to be trapped. This is where the barefoot detail enters the story. And this is the part that most viewers, even lifelong fans, have never fully understood. In the novel, Joe Leland is not barefoot. There is no toe-flexing scene. There is no carpet trick. That was invented for the film. Somewhere in the development process, a small character moment was written in to explain why a New York cop, freshly off a red-eye flight, would end up shoeless when a group of heavily armed men took over the building. The version repeated in interviews and DVD commentaries over the years goes something like this. Someone on set mentioned a folk trick for calming nerves after a long flight. Take off your shoes, curl your toes into the carpet, let your body reset. It became the scene where McClane sits at the Nakatomi Christmas party, feet bare, doing exactly that. It seemed like a throwaway moment, a quiet character grounding beat, just a way to explain why the guy in the middle of the action does not have footwear, but it accidentally became the physical spine of the entire film. Because once the shoes are off, they cannot come back on. And once they cannot come back on, everything that follows becomes about the vulnerability of a body that was not designed for war. What viewers remember as the barefoot action hero was originally just a nervous flyer detail meant to make the character feel human. That detail seemed harmless on paper. On the set, it became one of the most dangerous choices in the production, because now the glass had to be real. Well, real enough. The famous sequence where McClane runs across a floor covered in broken window glass, feet shredding with every step, was shot using tempered sugar glass candy. That is the standard movie trick. Sugar glass shatters into safer, blunter pieces than real glass. But it is not perfectly safe. Sugar glass has sharp edges at certain angles, and Willis himself has said in interviews over the years that he did cut his feet during filming. Not catastrophically, not in some studio cover-up way, but enough that the paint on screen carried a real edge of authenticity. And then came the moment that changed action cinema. The bathroom scene. McClane, exhausted, pulling shards out of his own soles with a pair of tweezers, talking to his own reflection, half laughing and half crying. In 1988, mainstream action heroes did not do this. Rambo did not do this. Commando did not do this. The Terminator did not do this. Those heroes were designed to be indestructible. Their bodies were the point. Their invulnerability was the fantasy. Die Hard tore that idea apart with a pair of bare feet and a bathroom sink. That scene changed what an action hero was allowed to be. Scared, tired, small, bleeding, talking to himself because there was nobody else left. The barefoot detail was not a stunt gimmick. It was the whole argument the movie was making. And that argument, more than any single one-liner or explosion, is what turned a Christmas Eve action film into the most replayed movie in cable television history. Because here is the strange truth about how most Americans actually remember Die Hard. They do not remember the theater. They remember the television. For an entire generation of viewers, this was not a movie you saw once on a big screen. It was a movie that lived inside a cable box. TNT played it every December. TBS looped it through the holidays. Local stations slotted it into weekend afternoon blocks. It sat on VHS shelves at Blockbuster with an orange logo and a shot of the Nakatomi Tower, waiting to be rented one more time. It appeared in TV guide listings next to A Christmas Story, and It's a Wonderful Life. And families watched it while wrapping presents, half paying attention, catching the barefoot scene during a commercial break for long-distance phone service. The version most viewers remember is not even the theatrical cut. It is the sanitized broadcast version, the one where the famous four-word catchphrase gets overdubbed into the now infamous line ending in Mr. Falcon, where entire chunks of profanity are scrubbed out with strange substitute words, where the violence is trimmed for standards and practices, and somehow, none of that dulled the impact of the barefoot scene. The physical horror of that moment survived every network edit. You could dub the swearing, you could cut the blood, you could break for commercials in the middle of the chase. But the sight of a man pulling glass out of his own feet, alone in a bathroom, hit the exact same nerve on a wood-paneled console television in 1993 as it did on a movie screen in 1988. That is the part that made the movie permanent. Not the box office, not the awards. The living room repetition, the half-watching, the catching it in the middle, the kids sneaking downstairs to see the R-rated movie their parents said no to, and finding a cop in an undershirt limping through an office building on Christmas Eve. It became a shared American memory assembled almost entirely through cable rerun infrastructure. And it worked because the emotional argument at the center of the film, that a hero could be an ordinary tired man, translated perfectly to the intimacy of a television screen. There is another piece of this that rarely gets mentioned. Reginald VelJohnson, who played Sergeant Al Powell, the friendly voice on the other end of McClane's radio, became something entirely different to television audiences less than a year later. He is the dad from Family Matters, the ABC family sitcom that ran from 1989 to 1998 and lived forever after in weekday afternoon reruns. So an entire generation of viewers first met VelJohnson as a big city cop, bonding with a bleeding stranger over a radio at Christmas, and then met him again a few months later as a warm suburban father whose show would define their after-school television for years. Those two performances lived side by side in reruns for decades. A kid could watch Family Matters at 4 in the afternoon and then catch VelJohnson again in Die Hard on TNT that same night. The same actor, the same warm voice, two completely different television memories, stitched together by the schedule. But the strangest legacy of that barefoot scene is not what it did for the movie. It is what it did to the actor who filmed it. Bruce Willis walked into Die Hard as a television comedy lead, making a risky career gamble. He walked out as the template for a new kind of screen hero, the reluctant action figure, the wisecracker who suffered, the everyman with a smirk. Every reluctant, bleeding, exhausted hero who came after him carried some genetic material from that carpet and glass sequence. Cable action reruns filled the 1990s with imitations. Network cop dramas absorbed the tone. Even later, television heroes who never once fired a gun borrowed the posture, the tiredness, the sense that heroism was a job that hurt. Willis kept playing that man for the next 3 decades. 4 Die Hard sequels, countless action films, late-night talk show appearances where he shrugged off the fame with the same smirk he had brought to moonlighting years earlier. He became, whether he wanted to or not, the last great everyman action face of the classic television viewing era. The kind of movie star who lived just as comfortably inside a cable rotation as he did on a theater marquee. And then, in 2022, his family announced that he had been diagnosed with aphasia and was stepping away from acting. Later, the diagnosis was updated to frontotemporal dementia. For longtime fans, especially the ones who grew up watching Die Hard on television every December, that announcement cast a very different light over the whole McClane legacy. The wisecracks played differently on rewatch, the tired eyes felt heavier. The Barefoot scene, once a symbol of physical toughness, started to look more like something else. A picture of a person insisting on staying present through pain, a body refusing to quit even when it clearly wanted to. It should be said, in fairness, that some of the production stories around Die Hard have shifted over the years. The list of actors who allegedly turned down the role has grown and shrunk, depending on which interview you read. The exact origin of the Barefoot detail has been told several different ways by several different people involved in the production. Some credit Willis, some credit the writer, Stephen E. D'Souza, some credit conversations that happened casually on set and were never formally recorded. That is normal for Hollywood memory. The people who make a movie are not usually thinking about which small choice will become mythology. They make the choice, they move on, and the story fills in later. But the Barefoot decision, whoever really made it, remains the single most important character choice in the entire film. It is the choice that made everything else possible. It is why the villains have leverage. It is why the fights are painful. It is why the hero has to think instead of overpower. It is why the movie still holds up on a Wednesday night rerun in December, decades after the sound stages have been rebuilt for other productions, and the Nakatomi Tower has gone back to being an ordinary Los Angeles office building. That tower, by the way, is real. It is called Fox Plaza. It was still under construction when Die Hard began filming, which is exactly why the production could use the upper floors for stunts and interior destruction without a landlord complaining. For years afterward, Fox executives worked inside the very building where Hans Gruber had fallen into movie history. Staffers walked past corridors they had watched a barefoot Bruce Willis crawl through on television every December. 2 versions of the same place, coexisting at the same address. One measurable in square footage and lease payments. The other measurable only in reruns and holiday nostalgia. That is what old television always does to real places. The diner from a family sitcom becomes a shrine. The suburban street from a childhood series becomes a pilgrimage site. Fox Plaza is a working office tower. It is also, in the collective imagination of an entire viewing generation, the place where the shoes came off. Both are true. Neither cancels the other. And here is the last strange fact about how this movie became what it is. Die Hard was not designed to be a Christmas movie. It came out in July of 1988, a summer release meant to compete for beach vacation moviegoers. The holiday setting was a plot convenience. It explained why the office building was mostly empty. It gave the terrorists a reason to expect a payroll vault to be full. It gave the hero a reason to be flying in from out of town. The Christmas trees, the party, the wrapped presents on desks, all of it was texture. Nobody involved seems to have thought they were making the next It's a Wonderful Life. It was the cable schedulers who did the real work of turning it into a holiday tradition. Programmers noticed that the action movie set at a Christmas party played surprisingly well in the last 2 weeks of the year, so they slotted it in. And then they slotted it in again, and again, year after year, until the association became so strong that new viewers assumed it had always been that way. Kids who were not even alive in 1988 grew up thinking of it as a Christmas tradition, arguing about whether it counted as a holiday film long before that debate became an internet joke. The argument itself was proof of how deeply the movie had lodged inside the American television calendar. Picture a living room now. It could be any December. Wood paneling, a cable box, a television glowing in a corner. The film is playing again, probably for the 100th time in that household. Someone is half wrapping a present. Someone else is walking through with a cup of coffee. And on the screen, a man with bare feet steps carefully across broken glass, wincing, cursing under his breath, trying to stay alive in a building that was never supposed to be a war zone. A father remembers seeing this in a theater in 1988. A grown child remembers seeing it on television as a kid, sneaking downstairs after bedtime. Neither of them can quite explain why the scene still hits the way it does. Maybe it is because the shoes were never supposed to come off in the first place. Maybe it is because the actor was never supposed to be Bruce Willis. Maybe it is because a contract from a Sinatra movie 2 decades earlier accidentally rewrote the shape of American action cinema. Or maybe it is because, somewhere between the sugar glass and the network overdubs, a movie about a Christmas party in a Los Angeles office building quietly became the last great story about a hero who could still be broken. The tower is just a building again. The theme song has faded. The cable channel has changed hands. The actor has stepped away. But somewhere tonight, on some screen, at some hour, a barefoot cop is still walking across the glass, and a viewer in a dark room is still flinching. That flinch is the reason the movie will never really end. Some screen memories cut a little deeper than we planned to let them, and once they cut, they stay cut, quietly, for the rest of our lives.